I thought she was gone forever. An officer breaks down when he finds his starving police dog. He hadn't seen his partner in over a year. Officer Charles Denton had accepted the unbearable truth. His K-9 partner, Sally, was gone, buried beneath the rubble of a warehouse explosion that left Charles in a wheelchair and Sally vanished without a trace. He had searched until his voice gave out. Every animal hospital, every street corner, every abandoned lot, but he found nothing. Everyone told him to let go. Everyone said no dog could have survived that inferno. Then on a rain-soaked afternoon, while his friend Aaron pushed his wheelchair past a bus stop, Charles's world stopped. A skeletal German shepherd, drenched in mud, shaking violently, barely conscious, lay curled against the rain-streaked glass. Charles whispered one word that shattered every wall he'd built around his heart. "Sally." The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, impossibly, she lifted her head at the sound of Charles's voice. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Officer Charles Denton had earned many titles during his years in the police force. Marksman, crisis negotiator, tactical lead. But none of them defined him the way the title stitched quietly above his badge did. K-9 handler. It wasn't just a rank. It was a sacred bond, a living promise, a covenant written in trust and sealed in loyalty. And that promise had been forged the day he met a young German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a soul that seemed to see straight through him. Sally. Sally wasn't like the other K-9 recruits. She was quicker, more intuitive, unervingly perceptive. As if she could read Charles's thoughts before he formed them into words. While other dogs waited for commands, Sally anticipated needs. And Charles, he was the only handler Sally ever truly chose. The bond ignited instantly, stunning even the veteran trainers who had witnessed thousands of pairings before. From that very first day, Charles knew Sally was extraordinary. Their training sessions became the stuff of legend at the academy. Sally cleared obstacle courses in record time. She memorized scent profiles within moments. She detected concealed dangers long before any human instinct could register the threat. But what truly set her apart wasn't her speed or her skill. It was the way she moved beside Charles. Always in rhythm with his stride, always watching his expressions, always attuned to the slightest shift in his breathing or the quietest change in his tone. On duty, they were a force of nature. They tracked missing children through blinding snowstorms. They uncovered narcotics hidden in walls and floors that even the best technology missed. They apprehended violent suspects who believed outrunning a K-9 was possible, until Sally appeared, silent and unstoppable, her name embodying the sudden, decisive force she represented. Every successful mission deepened their partnership. Every narrow escape strengthened their trust. And every moment off duty. Late-night walks through empty parks, quiet car rides with the windows down, simple moments of rest on Charles's apartment floor, deepened their bond beyond words. Charles didn't see Sally as a police asset. He didn't see her as a tool or a weapon. He saw her as the other half of his heartbeat. Their connection wasn't built on obedience. It was built on something far more profound. A language that existed in the space between heartbeats, in the fraction of a second before a command was spoken, in the weight of a glance exchanged across a crowded room. At the academy, while other handlers barked orders and corrections, Charles simply breathed. And Sally understood. When he shifted his weight to his left foot, she knew to circle right. When his hand moved to his holster, she dropped into a protective stance without being told. When his jaw tightened, just slightly, barely perceptible to anyone else, she knew danger was close. The instructors called it instinct. Charles called it something else entirely. Recognition. Like two people who'd known each other in another life, finding each other again in this one. During their final certification test, the evaluators placed Charles and Sally in a simulated hostage scenario. A test designed to break even the most experienced teams. 3 armed role players, hidden explosives, a ticking clock, and a victim screaming from somewhere in the darkness of the mock building. Most teams took 12 minutes. Some failed entirely. Charles whispered one word. Find. Sally moved like water through shadow. She didn't bark. She didn't hesitate. She flowed through the corridors with Charles 3 steps behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, letting her eyes become his eyes, her instincts become his compass. When she stopped at a doorway and her ears flattened, a movement so subtle it lasted less than a second, Charles knew. Ambush. He redirected. When she paused at a corner and her tail went rigid, he knew. Explosives. They went another way. For minutes and 37 seconds. A new Academy record. But Charles wasn't thinking about records when they crossed the finish line. He was on his knees, his forehead pressed against Sally's, his hands cradling her face as she panted happily, her tail sweeping the floor in wide, joyful arcs. The evaluators were applauding. The other handlers were stunned into silence. But in that moment, Charles and Sally existed in a world of two. A world where words like handler and K9 felt too small, too cold, too insufficient for what they actually were to each other. Family, if this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with people who need them. And drop a comment telling us where you're from. We love knowing our community spans the entire world. They graduated at the top of their class. And when Charles clipped the official badge onto Sally's vest for the first time, the badge that read, K9 Sally, Unit 47, he made her a promise. A quiet promise, spoken in the privacy of the Academy parking lot as rain drummed against the roof of his car, and Sally sat in the passenger seat, her head resting on his shoulder. I'll bring you home every single night. No matter what. I promise. Sally licked his cheek. Once. Gently. Like she was sealing the promise to. And for 3 years, Charles kept that promise. Through blizzards and heat waves, through routine patrols and high-risk raids, through the mundane tedium of paperwork and the heart-stopping chaos of pursuit, Charles and Sally came home together. Every single night. Until they didn't. The call came on a Tuesday, November 14th, 4:47 p.m. The kind of call that makes every officer's blood run cold. Suspected armed traffickers holed up in an industrial warehouse on the east side. Possible hostages, possible explosives, shots fired at responding units. Every available team was being deployed. Tactical, negotiators, bomb squad, and K9 units. Charles felt Sally tense in the back of the cruiser before he even put the vehicle in drive. She always knew. Somehow, she always knew when a call would be different. Dangerous. Her ears were forward, her body coiled like a spring, her dark eyes locked on Charles's reflection in the rearview mirror. We've got this, girl, Charles said quietly, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Just like always. But as they pulled up to the warehouse, a decaying industrial complex surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing and overgrown lots, Sally did something she'd never done before. She whined. A low, barely audible sound that vibrated in her chest, a sound that made every hair on Charles's arm stand up. Sally. Charles turned to face her. Her eyes were locked on the building. Not just alert. Afraid. Charles had learned to trust Sally's instincts above everything else, above dispatch reports, above tactical briefings, above his own gut. And right now, every fiber of her being was screaming that something was wrong. He radioed Lieutenant Clifford. Unit 47. Sally's signaling. Something's off. Clifford's voice crackled back. Copy that. Proceed with extreme caution. We've got your 6. Charles clipped Sally's tactical lead to her vest and stepped out of the cruiser. The November air was bitter, sharp enough to sting his lungs. The warehouse loomed ahead. 3 stories of crumbling brick and shattered windows, the kind of place where hope went to die. Other units were taking positions around the perimeter. The tactical team was suiting up. Everything was moving according to protocol. But Sally wouldn't move forward. She planted her paws, her body rigid, her head turning toward the main entrance, and then back to Charles, then to the entrance again. A clear signal. Danger. Immediate. Undeniable. I see you, girl. I see you. Charles murmured, his hand resting on her head. He radioed again. Sally's indicating high-level threat at main entry. Request additional sweep before breach. But before anyone could respond, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, gunfire erupted from a second-story window, not aimed at the officers, but wildly, desperately, into the air. A distraction. Second, someone inside screamed, a woman's voice, raw and terrified. A hostage. And third, Clifford's voice came through the radio, sharp and final. All units, we have confirmation of hostage in immediate danger. Tactical is moving in. K9 support required. Now, Charles's heart seized. Every instinct he had, every lesson Sally had ever taught him, was screaming to wait, to pull back, to reassess. But there was a woman inside, a human life hanging in the balance, and he had a job to do. He looked down at Sally. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, Charles saw something that would haunt him forever. Resignation. Like Sally knew what was coming. Like she'd already made her choice. Together, Charles whispered. Like always. They moved. The warehouse interior was a nightmare of shadows and rust, broken machinery, and collapsed scaffolding. The air reeked of chemicals and decay. Sally led the way, her movements precise but tense, every muscle in her body screaming resistance. Charles followed, his weapon drawn, his breathing controlled, his entire world narrowed to Sally's movements and the sounds echoing through the cavernous space. They reached the second floor. The tactical team was ahead, moving toward the source of the woman's screams. Charles and Sally were sweeping the perimeter, clearing rooms, ensuring no one could ambush the team from behind. It was textbook, perfect coordination. And then Sally stopped, dead still, in the center of a hallway that smelled like oil and something else, something chemical and wrong. Her hackles rose, her lips pulled back. And she did something Charles had only seen once before, during a training exercise involving live explosives. She barked. Sharp. Urgent. A warning bark that meant only one thing. Run. Charles's blood turned to ice. All units abort. Sally's indicating explosives. The world ended in fire. The explosion didn't roar, it screamed. A sound so massive, so all-consuming, that it swallowed every other sense. The floor disappeared. The ceiling became a rain of concrete and steel. The walls became shrapnel. And Charles felt himself lifted and thrown like a child's toy, his body slamming into something hard and unforgiving, his vision white with pain and smoke and heat. And through it all, through the deafening chaos and the choking dust and the sensation of everything collapsing inward, Charles heard one sound that cut through the apocalypse like a blade. Sally's bark. Not a warning bark. Not an alert bark. A bark of pure, primal terror. The bark of a soul being ripped apart. Sally. Charles screamed, his voice shredded, his lungs burning. He tried to move. Couldn't. Something was crushing his legs. Steel. Concrete. Impossible weight. The world was darkness and smoke and the taste of blood. Sally. Sally, where are you? Another bark. Weaker this time. Fading. Coming from somewhere to his left, buried beneath the mountain of rubble that used to be the second floor. Charles clawed at the debris, his fingers bleeding, his arms screaming in agony, his mind fracturing with desperation. I'm coming, girl. I'm coming. Stay with me. Stay with me. And then, silence. A silence so complete, so wrong, that it was louder than the explosion had been. Charles stopped breathing, stopped moving, stopped existing in any way that mattered. Sally. His voice was barely a whisper now. A prayer. A plea. Sally, please. Please bark. Please, baby, just bark one more time. Let me know where you are. Please. Nothing. The ceiling groaned. Something massive shifted above him. And Charles realized with horrible, crushing clarity that he had seconds, maybe less, before the entire structure came down. He could hear voices outside, muffled and distant. The rescue teams, coming for survivors. But Sally was buried somewhere in the darkness. And if Charles didn't reach her now, in this moment, she would die alone in the rubble. He pulled harder. Felt something in his back snap. The pain was blinding, absolute, but he didn't care. He would tear the building apart with his bare hands if he had to. He would. The ceiling collapsed. Not on him, but between him and Sally. Tons of concrete and steel, creating an impenetrable wall, sealing Sally away on the other side. The last thing Charles saw before the dust consumed everything was a flash of brown fur, motionless, half buried beneath the debris. And then strong hands were dragging him backward, voices shouting. His own voice screaming Sally's name until his throat gave out. The world tilting, spinning. Darkness. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Please share this story. Someone in your life needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, have you ever lost someone you couldn't imagine living without? Charles woke up in a hospital 3 days later. The first thing he asked, the only thing he asked, was about Sally. Lieutenant Clifford was there. His face said everything before his mouth opened. Charles, I'm so sorry. The collapse was total. We searched for 72 hours straight. If she was in there, there's no way. Did you find her body? Charles's voice was hollow. Dead. Clifford hesitated. No. But Charles, the amount of rubble, the heat from the fire. Did you find her body? No. Charles turned his face to the wall. He didn't speak for 6 days. When they told him the extent of his injuries, shattered vertebrae, severed nerves, that he'd never walk again, Charles didn't react. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. He just stared at the ceiling with eyes that no longer saw anything. Because what did it matter? What did any of it matter? They gave him a medal. For bravery. For saving the hostage. The tactical team had gotten her out seconds before the collapse. Charles didn't attend the ceremony. Didn't want the medal. Didn't want condolences or recognition or anything except the one thing he could never have. Sally. Months blurred together in a haze of physical therapy and empty rooms. Charles moved into a ground-floor apartment, accessible for his wheelchair. His friend Aaron, another officer from the precinct, helped him move his things. And when Aaron opened the box labeled Sally, Charles's voice came out sharp and broken. Don't. Just put it in the corner. Don't open it. Inside that box was everything. Sally's favorite toy, a rope with her teeth marks worn into every inch. Her food bowl, still with a few pieces of kibble in the bottom from the morning of November 14th. Her collar, her badge. Charles couldn't look at it, couldn't touch it, but he couldn't throw it away either. So it sat in the corner of his living room, a memorial to everything he'd lost, gathering dust while Charles gathered ghosts. He didn't accept a new K-9 partner, didn't return to duty, barely left his apartment except for mandatory medical appointments. The department offered counseling, therapy, support groups. Charles went to 2 sessions and never came back. Because how do you explain to someone that you didn't just lose a dog? You lost the part of yourself that knew how to be whole. You lost your purpose, your rhythm, the language you spoke that no one else could hear. You lost the promise you made. I'll bring you home every night. And that broken promise was a knife that twisted deeper every single day. At night, Charles dreamed of the warehouse, of Sally's bark, of his hands clawing through rubble. And he would wake up screaming her name into the darkness, his face wet with tears, his chest heaving with sobs that never brought relief. 1 year, 365 days of existing in a world that felt like a movie he no longer belonged in. Where other people laughed and moved on and lived their lives while Charles remained frozen in the moment that ceiling collapsed, forever reaching for a shadow he could never touch. Until a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 7 days after the warehouse, when Aaron insisted on taking him out for coffee. You need to leave this apartment, man. Just for an hour. It was raining. The kind of cold, relentless November rain that turns the world gray and makes everything feel heavier. Aaron was pushing Charles's wheelchair past a bus stop when Charles saw something that stopped his heart. A dog, skeletal, mud-covered, trembling, collapsed against the rain-streaked glass of the bus shelter. A German shepherd. Wait, Charles whispered. Stop. Charles, that's just a stray. Stop. Aaron stopped. Charles stared. The dog was barely breathing, ribs visible through matted fur, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Dying. Anyone could see it was dying. But there was something about the way the dog held its ears, the particular angle of its head, the shape of. Charles's hands were shaking as he wheeled himself closer. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might shatter his ribs. This wasn't possible. It wasn't. But tied around the dog's front paw, barely visible beneath the mud and scarring, was a blackened piece of metal. Charles reached out with trembling fingers and wiped away the grime. Underneath, scorched but still legible, were 2 words. K-9 Sally. The world tilted. Charles couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was seeing because it was impossible. She was gone. She was dead. She had to be dead. Sally. The word came out broken. Destroyed. A question that contained every ounce of hope and grief Charles had left in his body. The dog's ear twitched. Slowly, so slowly it felt like watching a miracle happen in real time. The dog lifted its head, and 2 brown eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion but still somehow, impossibly, recognizably hers, met Charles's gaze. Recognition flashed in those eyes. The dog's tail moved. Just once. The faintest wag. And then she whimpered. A sound so heartbreaking, so full of relief and agony and joy and despair that Charles felt something inside his chest shatter completely. Oh God. Oh my God. Sally. Sally. Charles was sobbing now, his hands reaching for her, his whole body shaking. How are you? You're alive. You're alive. You're. Sally tried to stand. Collapsed. Tried again. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She was too weak, too broken. But she kept trying, kept dragging herself toward Charles with every ounce of strength she had left, whimpering with each movement, her eyes never leaving his face. Charles threw himself out of his wheelchair. He hit the wet pavement hard, pain exploding through his useless legs, but he didn't care. He crawled toward Sally, closing the 3 feet between them that felt like 3 miles. And then his arms were around her, and she was pressing her face into his neck, and they were both shaking and broken and somehow, impossibly, together. "I'm sorry." Charles wept into her fur. "I'm so sorry, baby. I looked for you. I swear I looked for you. I never stopped. I never." Sally licked his face. Weak, exhausted, but unmistakable. Aaron was on his phone, his voice urgent. "We need an emergency vet now." "Yes, it's critical." "Yes, we're coming." But Charles barely heard him, because in his arms was a miracle, a ghost made flesh. The other half of his soul returned from the grave. Sally had spent a year searching for him, a year surviving, a year refusing to give up. And now she was dying in his arms, and Charles realized with horror that finding each other might not be enough. If this story is breaking your heart, please share it. Please let people know that love like this exists, that loyalty like this is real. "Stay with me," Charles whispered against Sally's ear, his voice fierce despite the tears. You found me, baby, so you don't get to leave. Not now, not after everything. Stay with me, please. I'm begging you. Stay." Sally's eyes were closing. Her breathing was shallow, fading, and Charles felt the world narrowing to this single moment, this single, desperate, impossible moment, where everything hung in the balance, and the only thing that mattered was keeping her alive long enough to save her. "Aaron." Charles's voice was steel-wrapped in terror. "Drive. Now." Aaron's car became a vessel carrying the weight of 12 months' worth of prayers. Rain hammered the windshield like bullets, the wipers barely keeping pace with the deluge. In the back seat, Charles cradled Sally against his chest, his police uniform soaked through. Not from the rain, but from the mud and blood transferring from her ravaged body to his. "Stay with me, Sally. Stay with me." Charles whispered it like a mantra, like if he said it enough times it would become law, become physics, become something even death would have to obey. His fingers pressed gently against her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, thin, thready, fading like a radio signal moving out of range. Sally's breathing had become something terrible to witness. Each inhale was a shudder. Each exhale sounded like surrender. Her eyes were half closed, the light in them dimming, and Charles could see her slipping away in real time, could feel the warmth leaving her body despite how tightly he held her. "How far?" Charles's voice cracked. 5 minutes. Maybe less. Aaron's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He ran a red light. Then another. His phone was wedged between his shoulder and ear, the voice of Dr. Michelle Reyes. The emergency veterinarian Aaron had called, crackling through the speaker. "Is she conscious?" Dr. Reyes's voice was calm, professional, the kind of calm that comes from years of walking the razor's edge between life and death. Charles looked down at Sally. Her eyes flickered toward him, just barely, a movement so small it could have been imagined. Barely. "Is she breathing on her own?" "Yes, but it's..." Charles's voice broke completely. "It's not good. Please, please, we're almost there. Just have everything ready." "We're ready, Officer Denton. You get her here. We'll do the rest." But as Aaron took a corner too fast, tires screaming against wet asphalt, Sally's body went completely limp in Charles's arms. The shallow breathing stopped. The slight tension in her muscles, the last evidence that she was still fighting, simply vanished. "No." The word came out of Charles like a gunshot. "No, no, no. Sally? Sally." He pressed his ear to her chest. Her heart was still beating. He could feel it, a fragile flutter against his cheek, but she'd stopped breathing. "Aaron, she's not breathing. She's not." 30 seconds. Aaron's voice was raw. "Hold on, Charles. 30 seconds." Charles tilted Sally's head back, his hands shaking so violently he could barely control them. He'd done this in training. CPR, rescue breathing, on dummies, on simulations. Never on the one being he loved more than his own life. He placed his mouth over Sally's nose and muzzle and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. His tears fell onto her fur, mixing with the rain and mud. "Come on, baby. Come on. Breathe. You don't get to give up now. Breathe. I found you. You found me. Breathe. We're together. That means you fight. Breathe. You fight, Sally. Fight. A shudder ran through her body. A gasp. Shallow. Desperate. But she was breathing again. Barely. But breathing. That's it. That's my girl. That's my girl. Charles was sobbing openly now, his forehead pressed against hers. Almost there. Almost there. Just hold on. The car screeched to a stop. Emergency Animal Hospital. The doors burst open and Dr. Michelle Reyes was already there with a gurney and 2 vet techs. They moved like a choreographed dance, like they'd done this 1,000 times, which they probably had. But Charles couldn't let go. His arms were locked around Sally, his entire body refusing the command to release her. Officer Denton. Dr. Reyes's voice cut through his panic. Charles, look at me. He did. Her eyes were kind but firm. I need you to let her go now. Every second counts. Let us save her. It was the hardest thing Charles had ever done. Harder than facing down armed suspects. Harder than surviving the explosion. Harder than the 12 months of grief that had hollowed him out from the inside. His arms opened. The techs lifted Sally onto the gurney. And suddenly, she was moving away from him, disappearing through the double doors marked, emergency personnel only. And Charles was left in the rain with empty arms and a terror so complete it felt like drowning. Aaron caught him as his body gave out. Held him as Charles collapsed into racking sobs that came from somewhere so deep, so primal, that they didn't even sound human anymore. If you've ever loved something so much that losing it felt like losing yourself, please hit that subscribe button. This community is built on people who understand that kind of love. And drop a comment telling us about the bond you've shared with an animal. We read every single one. The waiting room was designed for anxiety. Fluorescent lights. Plastic chairs. A clock that seemed to move slower with each passing second. Charles sat in his wheelchair, his hands clasped so tightly his fingers had gone numb. Aaron sat beside him, silent, because what words existed for this? What comfort could possibly suffice? 20 minutes passed. 30. 45. Each minute was a small death. Charles's mind was creating scenarios. Sally on a cold metal table, her heart stopping, doctors shaking their heads, saying, "We did everything we could." He'd heard those words before. At the hospital after the warehouse. About his legs. About his future. He couldn't hear them again. Not about Sally. Not when they'd just found each other. An hour and 12 minutes after they'd arrived, Dr. Reyes emerged from the double doors. Her scrubs were splattered with blood. Sally's blood. Charles's heart stopped. She's alive. Dr. Reyes said it quickly, immediately, because she could see Charles on the edge of collapse. She's alive, but Charles, she's critical. The next few hours will determine everything. Charles couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, just nodded for her to continue. Dr. Reyes sat down across from them, her exhaustion evident in every line of her face. We've stabilized her for now. But the extent of her injuries. Charles, I need you to understand what she's been through. What she survived. Tell me. His voice was barely a whisper. Multiple fractures in her right front leg, completely healed wrong. She's been walking on a broken leg for months. Severe malnutrition. Dehydration so extreme, she should be dead. Her kidneys are failing. She has scarring on her lungs consistent with smoke inhalation and prolonged exposure to environmental toxins. She has burns. Old burns, mostly healed, covering 20% of her body. Dr. Reyes paused, and Charles saw her eyes glistening. Charles, she has scars consistent with trying to dig through rubble. Her paws are, the pads are nearly gone. Just scar tissue. She tried to dig you out. Charles's world ended for the second time in 13 months. Sally had been trapped in that warehouse, injured and terrified, and instead of saving herself, instead of escaping, she tried to reach him. She destroyed her own paws trying to dig through concrete and steel to get to him. Oh God. Charles's voice broke. Oh God, Sally. There's more, Dr. Reyes continued, and Charles didn't know if he could bear more, but he nodded. Her heart is weak. The stress, the malnutrition, the trauma, it's damaged her cardiac muscle. We have her on 4 fluids, antibiotics, pain medication, and cardiac support. We're doing everything we can. But Charles, she leaned forward, her voice gentle but honest. I can't promise she'll make it through the night. Her body has been through too much. She's been surviving on pure will for over a year. And sometimes Sometimes will isn't enough. Can I see her? The question came out strangled. Dr. Reyes hesitated. She's sedated. Intubated. She won't know you're there. She'll know. Charles's voice was absolute. Please. I need her to know I'm here. I need her to know I didn't leave her again. Something in Dr. Reyes's expression softened. She nodded. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. Aaron helped Charles into a sanitized wheelchair. His own was too covered in mud and blood. They followed Dr. Reyes through the double doors, down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fear, into the ICU. The room was dim, quiet except for the rhythmic beep of monitors and the mechanical hiss of a ventilator. And there, on a table surrounded by machines and tubes and wires, was Sally. Charles had prepared himself, thought he'd prepared himself, but nothing could have prepared him for this. She looked so small, so broken. Her fur had been shaved in places where IVs entered her veins. Her leg was in a cast. Bandages covered burns he couldn't bear to imagine. The tube in her throat was helping her breathe. The monitors showed numbers Charles didn't understand, but he understood the weakness of the beeps, the fragility of the lines moving across the screens. 5 minutes, Dr. Reyes whispered, then left them alone. Charles wheeled himself as close as he could. His hand found the small patch of fur on Sally's head that wasn't covered by bandages or tubes. It was still soft, still her. He stroked it gently, afraid he might hurt her, afraid his touch might somehow be too much for her ravaged body to handle. Hey, baby girl. His voice was soft, tender. The voice he'd used every night when he came home from shift, when Sally would greet him at the door with her tail wagging and her entire body wiggling with joy. It's me. It's Charles. I'm here. The monitors didn't change. Sally didn't move. But Charles continued anyway. I'm so sorry, Sally. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I promised I'd bring you home every night, and I broke that promise. I broke it, and you paid the price. You've been out there for over a year, suffering, searching, and his voice cracked. I thought you were dead. I thought I'd lost you forever. And maybe part of me wanted to be lost too. Because what was I without you? Aaron, standing by the door, wiped his eyes. But you didn't give up, did you? Charles continued, his tears falling freely now, dropping onto the metal table. You survived. You kept fighting. You found your way back to me. And now I need you to fight just a little bit longer. I need you to be as stubborn and determined as you've always been. Because I can't lose you again, Sally. I can't. You're not just my partner. You're my family. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. His voice broke completely. You're my whole heart. The room was silent except for the machines. Charles pressed his forehead against Sally's, careful to avoid the tubes, and he stayed there, breathing in sync with the ventilator, as if he could somehow give her his strength, his will, his very life if that's what it took to keep her alive. I'm right here, Charles whispered. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here, Sally. Right here. And then something miraculous happened. One of the monitors changed. The heart rate, weak and erratic for the past hour, suddenly steadied. Not much. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough that Aaron's breath caught. Enough that Charles pulled back and stared at the screen in disbelief. Did you see that? Aaron's voice was hushed, reverent, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile magic was occurring. Charles looked at Sally's face. Her eyes were still closed, but her breathing, even through the ventilator, seemed less labored. And deep in her throat, barely audible, so faint it could have been imagination, was a sound, a vibration, the ghost of a whimper. She knew, despite the sedation, despite the trauma, despite everything, she knew Charles was there. That's it, baby. That's it. Charles's hand never left her head. I'm here. I'm right here. And I'm not leaving. Not ever again. Dr. Reyes appeared in the doorway. Charles, I need to. She stopped. Stared at the monitors. Blinked. That's not possible. What? Charles's heart leapt into his throat. What's not possible? Her vitals. They were crashing when I left. Now they're stabilizing. Dr. Reyes moved to the monitors, checking readings, her professional composure cracking into something like wonder. Her heart rate is stronger. Her blood pressure is coming up. Her oxygen saturation is improving. I've never seen this before. She knows I'm here. Charles said simply. Dr. Reyes looked at him. Really looked at him. And then she nodded. Stay? As long as you want. I think. I think she needs you more than she needs anything we can give her. If this story is making you believe in miracles, please share it. Please let the world know that love can do the impossible. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed something you couldn't explain, something that defied all logic except the logic of love? Charles stayed for 6 hours. Aaron brought him coffee he didn't drink, food he didn't eat. Lieutenant Clifford showed up at some point, his gruff exterior cracking when he saw Sally hooked up to machines, saw Charles holding vigil like a man at a graveside who'd just learned the grave was empty. She's a fighter, Clifford said quietly, his hand resting briefly on Charles's shoulder. Always was. She learned it from me, Charles replied. And now I'm learning it back from her. At 3:47 a.m., Dr. Reyes made the call to try extubating Sally. Her breathing has been strong enough on her own for the past 2 hours. If we can get her off the ventilator, her chances improve significantly. But Charles, if her body can't handle it, we'll have to reintubate immediately. Or she dies, Charles finished. I understand. Do you want to leave the room while we? No. Charles's voice was firm. If she's fighting, I'm fighting with her. I'm not leaving. The process took less than 3 minutes, but felt like 3 lifetimes. Dr. Reyes and her team moved with precision, removing the tube, adjusting Sally's position, monitoring every breath. For a terrifying moment, Sally didn't breathe at all. The monitors screamed. Charles's hand tightened on her fur. And then, a breath. Ragged. Weak. But hers. Another breath. Stronger. Sally's eyes flickered open. Just barely. Just enough for Charles to see that familiar brown gaze, clouded with pain and confusion, but unmistakably, miraculously alive and aware. Hey, beautiful girl, Charles whispered, his voice thick with tears he'd cried 1,000 times over the past 6 hours and was somehow still capable of producing. There you are. There's my Sally. Sally's tail moved. Not a wag, just a small twitch. But it was intentional. It was communication. It was her way of saying what she'd always said when Charles came home. I waited. You're here now. We're together. We're together, Charles echoed, as if reading her mind, which maybe he was, because their language had always existed beyond words. And we're going to stay together. I promise, Sally. I promise. Dr. Reyes was crying. Aaron was crying. Even Clifford, the man who'd been a cop for 30 years and claimed he'd seen everything, was wiping his eyes. Over the next 48 hours, Sally improved in small increments. She came off for fluids, started eating small amounts of food, which Charles fed her by hand, one tiny piece at a time. The dangerous kidney numbers started moving in the right direction. The heart medication was reduced. She was still critical, still fragile, but she was alive, and she was fighting. Charles never left her side. He slept in his wheelchair, his head resting on the edge of her crate, his hand always touching her. The hospital staff brought him blankets, food, told him gently that he needed to take care of himself too. But Charles wouldn't, because every time he closed his eyes for more than a moment, he saw that ceiling collapsing, heard Sally's last bark, felt the weight of a year's worth of guilt crushing him all over again. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Reyes found Charles awake, as he always was, murmuring softly to Sally about memories. About the time Sally had tracked a missing child through a blizzard and found her safe in an abandoned barn. About the time Sally had refused to leave Charles's side when he had the flu, even though it meant missing her favorite training session. About the promise Charles had made a year ago that he thought he'd never get the chance to keep. Charles. Dr. Reyes's voice was gentle. She's stable enough to go home. Not healed. She has months of recovery ahead. But stable. She can continue healing with you. Charles looked up, and Dr. Reyes saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. Home. Charles repeated. With me. With you. She'll need medication. Physical therapy. Follow-up appointments. And Charles, her leg. The one that healed wrong. At some point, we'll need to re-break it and reset it properly. It'll be painful. Long recovery. But without it, she'll never walk normally again. Charles looked at his own legs. Useless. Paralyzed. He understood better than anyone what it meant to lose mobility. What it meant to have your body betray you. Whatever she needs. Whatever it takes. I don't care about the cost. I don't care about His voice caught. She spent a year surviving the impossible to find me. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never has to survive anything alone again. Dr. Reyes smiled. I know you will. That's why I'm letting her go home with you. The day Charles brought Sally home was cloudless and cold, the kind of November day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. Aaron had spent the morning making Charles's apartment Sally-proof, soft bedding on the floor, water bowls at wheelchair height, non-slip mats on the hardwood. The box in the corner, Sally's box, the one Charles hadn't been able to open for 13 months, was gone. Its contents had been unpacked. Sally's old collar hanging by the door. Her favorite rope toy on the couch. Her bowl, cleaned and filled, waiting. When Charles wheeled through the door with Sally limping slowly beside him, refusing the pet carrier, refusing to be carried, insisting on walking on her own 3 good legs and 1 casted leg, she stopped. Her nose lifted. She was home. After 427 days, she was home. She moved slowly through the apartment, sniffing every corner, every piece of furniture, reacquainting herself with the space that smelled like Charles, like safety, like before. When she reached the spot where her bed used to be, where it was again, she turned in a careful circle and lay down with a sigh so deep, so full of relief, that it sounded like she'd been holding it for over a year. Charles watched her settle, watched her eyes close, watched her breathing even out into the rhythm of real sleep. Not survival mode, not hypervigilance, but actual rest. And something inside Charles that had been shattered for 13 months began, very slowly, to piece itself back together. That night, Charles woke at 3 a.m. to find Sally standing beside his bed, something she shouldn't have been able to do with her injuries, but apparently no one had told Sally about limitations. She was staring at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight coming through the window. Hey girl, you okay? You need something? Charles reached out, and Sally did something she'd done 1,000 times before the warehouse. She rested her head on the bed, right next to Charles's hand, close enough for him to feel her breathing. I'm here, Charles whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Sally's tail thumped once against the floor, and Charles realized she wasn't checking if he needed something. She was checking if he was real, if this was real, if she could finally stop searching. It's real, Sally. We're both here. We're both. His voice broke. We're both broken, but we're both here. And that's enough. That has to be enough. But it wasn't enough. Not for Charles. Because 6 weeks later, when Sally had healed enough to go on short supervised walks, Charles asked Aaron to drive them somewhere. Aaron looked at the address and went pale. Charles, are you sure? You don't have to. I have to, Charles said simply. We both have to. The warehouse ruins stood like a monument to trauma. The city had cleared the debris but left the structure's skeleton standing, a memorial to the officers injured in the collapse, to the hostage who'd survived. The chain-link fence was covered in flowers and photos and letters. A plaque had been installed, in honor of those who serve. Charles wheeled himself as close to the fence as he could. Sally stood beside him, her body tense, her ears back. She remembered. Of course she remembered. This place had tried to kill them both. We don't have to go closer, Aaron said quietly. But Charles was already moving toward the gap in the fence, the one where emergency crews had first entered. Sally followed, limping, hesitant, but following. Because where Charles went, Sally went. That had always been their truth. They stopped at the exact spot where the second floor used to be, where the ceiling had collapsed, where Charles had heard Sally's last bark and thought he'd lost her forever. The November wind was cold. The sky was gray. And Charles felt the weight of 13 months pressing down on him like all that rubble had pressed down on his legs. This is where I failed you, Charles said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. This is where I couldn't keep my promise. Couldn't protect you. Couldn't save you. Sally pressed against his wheelchair, her warmth seeping through his uniform. But you saved yourself. You survived when I thought survival was impossible. You found your way back to me when I'd given up hope. You taught me, his voice broke. You taught me that broken doesn't mean finished. That losing pieces of yourself doesn't mean you stop being yourself. That love. He looked down at Sally, and she looked up at him, and in that moment their wordless language spoke volumes. That love is stronger than rubble, stronger than pain, stronger than a year of darkness. Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out Sally's old badge. The one she'd been wearing the day of the explosion, the one they'd found in the recovered debris. It was scorched, bent, but still there. He held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, and then he placed it on the ground at the edge of the ruins. "We're not those officers anymore," Charles said quietly. "Not K9 Unit 47. We're something else now. Something that survived the unsurvivable. And we don't owe this place anything else. Not our pain. Not our guilt. Not our future." He looked at Sally. "You ready to go home?" Sally's tail wagged. A real wag. Strong and certain. "Then let's go home." As they turned away from the warehouse, Charles rolling, Sally limping beside him, Aaron following silently, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. And Charles could have sworn he felt something lift from his shoulders. Not all the weight, not all the grief, but enough. Enough to breathe a little easier. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build a life from the pieces they had left. If you're still watching this story, if it's touched something in you that you thought was untouchable, please subscribe. Please join this community of people who believe that hope is always worth fighting for. And tell us what you're fighting for. Tell us what you refuse to give up on. Because your story matters. Your fight matters. 3 months later, Sally underwent surgery to re-break and properly set her leg. The recovery was brutal. Charles sat by her crate every day, doing his physical therapy exercises while she did hers, their determination mirroring each other. When Sally whimpered in pain, Charles would reach through the crate and hold her paw, murmuring the same words over and over. "I'm right here. We're doing this together." 6 months after the bus stop reunion, Charles received a letter from the police department. They wanted to reinstate him, not as active field duty, his injuries made that impossible, but as a K9 training coordinator, teaching new handlers and new dogs the very thing Charles and Sally had mastered, the language without words, the bond that made good teams legendary. Charles accepted, on one condition: Sally came with him. The first day back at the academy, Charles wheeled into the training yard with Sally walking beside him, still limping, but walking. The new recruits stared. These were young officers who'd heard the legend of Charles and Sally, who'd read the reports about the warehouse, who thought they were seeing ghosts made flesh. Charles positioned himself at the center of the yard. Sally sat beside his wheelchair, her posture perfect despite her scars, her eyes alert despite everything she'd endured. "I'm Officer Charles Denton," he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "And this is Sally. And we're going to teach you the most important thing you'll ever learn as a K9 officer. It's not about commands. It's not about control. It's about connection. It's about trust. It's about making a promise to your partner that you'll do everything in your power to keep them safe, and understanding that sometimes, despite everything you do, that promise will be tested in ways you can't imagine." He paused, his hand resting on Sally's head. She leaned into his touch. "Sally and I were supposed to be finished. The warehouse should have ended our story. Instead, it taught us what our story was really about. It was never about being unbreakable. It was about learning how to put the pieces back together when everything falls apart. It was about refusing to give up, even when giving up seems like the only reasonable option. It was about love that survives fire and rubble and a year of darkness." The recruits were silent, riveted. Your dogs will become your family, your partners, your best friends. And you'll face moments where you'll have to choose between your safety and theirs, between following protocol and following your instinct, between what makes sense and what your heart is screaming at you to do. Charles's voice grew stronger. "And in those moments, I want you to remember something. I want you to remember that Sally spent a full year, surviving the impossible because she refused to believe I was gone. She refused to stop searching. She refused to stop hoping. And when she found me, broken and hollow and barely a shadow of who I used to be, she didn't care. She didn't care about my wheelchair or my scars or the fact that I could never be the officer I used to be. She just cared that we were together again." Sally's tail wagged. One solid, definitive wag. "That's love," Charles said softly. "That's what you're building when you train with your K9 partner. Not obedience, not performance. Love. And love. Real love. The kind that survives explosions and loss and a year of hell. That kind of love is unbreakable. Even when everything else breaks. Even when you break. Love remains." The academy erupted into applause. But Charles barely heard it. Because Sally had stood up, walked around his wheelchair, and placed her head in his lap. The gesture she'd made 1,000 times before, the gesture that meant, "We're okay. You and I. We're okay." Charles rested his hand on her head, his fingers finding the familiar soft spot behind her ear, and he thought about promises. About the promise he'd made in the academy parking lot 3 years ago. About how he'd broken that promise. About how Sally had survived the breaking and found her way back anyway. About how sometimes the most important promises aren't the ones you keep perfectly. They're the ones you refuse to abandon even when keeping them seems impossible. "We're okay," Charles whispered to Sally, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You and me. We're okay." Sally licked his hand once, gently, and Charles Denton, former tactical lead, current K-9 training coordinator, survivor of the unsurvivable, broken man with a broken dog who'd somehow found wholeness in their brokenness. Charles smiled. A real smile. For the first time in over a year. Because he was home. They were home. Not in a building or a city or even in the apartment where Sally's bowl waited by the door. They were home in each other. In the space between heartbeats. In the language without words. In the promise that even when it breaks, you keep anyway. And that was enough. If this story has changed you, if it's reminded you that miracles are real and love is stronger than anything that tries to destroy it, please share this. Please let someone know that hope survives. That broken things can heal. That the love between a man and his dog can withstand fire and rubble and a year of darkness and come out the other side still intact, still breathing, still fighting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this story. From wherever you are in the world, thank you.